The station was enormous. That was the first thing anyone noticed when they approached Axiom Eternal, the sheer, ridiculous size of it. It was shaped like a ring, wide enough to swallow a small moon, and it hung in space above a dying red star like a crown placed on a rotting head. Lights ran along its outer edge, in long, slow pulses, as if the station itself was breathing. Ships from a dozen different civilizations were docked along its arms. Long silver vessels, fat rounded transports, sleek angular cruisers that looked like they had been carved from bone. And then, at the very end of the smallest docking arm, almost like an afterthought, was the human ship. It was called the Resolute. It was not large. It was not impressive. Compared to the other ships docked at Axiom Eternal, it looked like a tool shed parked next to a row of palaces. But it was clean, and it was steady, and it had made the 4-month journey without a single system failure, which was more than could be said for the Dusk Collective's third diplomatic cruiser, currently being repaired 2 arms down. Ambassador Ilara Voss stood at the viewport of the Resolute's small observation deck and looked at the station for a long moment. She had silver hair cut short, a plain gray diplomat's coat, and the kind of face that did not give away much. She was 53 years old. She had spent 26 of those years in rooms where people were trying to take something from her. And she had learned, very early, that the most dangerous thing she could do in those rooms was let them know she understood what they were doing. She picked up her data slate, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the docking bridge. The Grand Conclave Chamber was built to impress. That was its only real purpose. The ceiling was so high it was almost invisible, lost in shadow and soft blue light. The floor was a single piece of dark stone, one solid slab, brought from some quarried world that no longer existed, and it was so polished that the representatives walking across it could see their own reflections beneath their feet. The seats were arranged in a wide half-circle, tiered like an amphitheater, and each seat was sized and shaped for the biology of the civilization it belonged to. Humanity's seat was at the far left end of the lowest tier. It was a standard chair. Plain back, flat seat, no adjustments. It had been placed there the morning before the summit began, added like a footnote, slotted in at the edge of the row where the junior observers usually sat. Dr. Piotr Malin, Voss's advisor, had noticed it immediately when they entered. He was a thin man with round glasses and a habit of saying uncomfortable things in a very calm voice. "They put us next to the ventilation outlet," he said quietly. "I noticed," Voss said. She sat down, opened her data slate, and began reviewing her notes. The chamber filled slowly. The elder races did not hurry. They had millions of years of history behind them and moved with the ease of beings who had never had to rush toward anything. The Velthari delegation entered in a slow procession. Archon Velthari himself at the center, a tall creature with 7 long limbs and pale gray skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He walked with a kind of deliberate stillness that made the room feel quieter just by his presence. He did not look at the human delegation when he passed. None of them did. The session opened without ceremony. Archon Velthari took the primary speaker's position and began with the standard procedural recitations, ancient words spoken in the conclave's original tongue, then translated by the chamber's matrix into every language present. Voss listened through her earpiece. Malin had his eyes closed, which was how he always listened when he was paying the most attention. The recitations ended. Velthari folded 2 of his limbs across his chest and looked out at the chamber. "The matter before this council," he said, "is the question of the human expansion into the Outer Rim territories. 12 star systems settled in 60 years, 3 territorial disputes with established trade routes, 2 incidents involving unauthorized survey operations inside protected zones." He paused. "The council has deliberated. A resolution has been prepared." A document appeared on every delegate's screen simultaneously. Voss looked at it. She read it carefully, from the first line to the last, including the fine print at the bottom that most delegates probably skipped. Then, she read it again. The resolution was long, but its meaning was simple. Humanity would be confined to a zone of 12 stars, the ones they already occupied, with no right to settle, survey, or operate beyond that boundary. All current Outer Rim operations would be withdrawn within 18 months. The zone would be monitored by council-appointed vessels. Any violation would be treated as an act of aggression against the collective. The document used the phrase, "for the stability of the galactic community" 11 times. Mullen had opened his eyes. He was reading the same document on his own slate, his face completely still. Voss did not react. She simply noted something on her slate, turned to the next page, and kept reading. Representative Omari of the Dust Collective rose to speak. He was old, ancient, even by the standards of the elder races, with a broad, flat face, 4 arms, and the slow, heavy movements of something that had been important for so long it had forgotten what it felt like not to be. He spoke about order. He spoke about the responsibility of established civilizations to maintain balance. He used the word containment once, caught himself, and replaced it with coordination. No one in the chamber reacted to the slip. Voss wrote it down. Other representatives spoke. Some were brief. Some were long. The HAL Confederacy's delegate gave a 12-minute address about the ecological sensitivity of the Outer Rim trade corridors that had, as far as Voss could tell, nothing to do with humanity and everything to do with a resource dispute the HAL had with the Dust Collective that predated human spaceflight entirely. The Sarin Assembly said almost nothing, just a formal note of agreement and a short bow. Through all of it, Voss sat and listened, and took notes. When the final speaker finished, Velthari looked toward the human delegation for the first time. "Ambassador Voss," he said, "the human delegation has been extended the courtesy of hearing this resolution before its formal passage. You have been granted 72 hours to review and provide your acknowledgement. At the close of that period, the resolution will be ratified." He paused. "Is there anything you wish to say at this time?" Voss looked up from her slate. "No," she said. "Thank you." Velthari held her gaze for a moment, an extra second, perhaps, of attention he had not given her before. Then he turned away, and the session was closed. As the chamber emptied, Mullen leaned close and spoke in a low voice. "They're not asking for your opinion," he said. "They're giving you time to accept." "I know," Voss said. 72 hours isn't very long." "It's enough," she said. She closed her data slate, stood up, and straightened her coat. "I've had 26 years of practice reading rooms like this one, and I've been reading their history for 3. She walked toward the exit without looking back at the empty chair behind her. Outside, through the long glass corridor that connected the chamber to the delegation quarters, the dying red star burned slow and distant below the station. It had been burning for 6 billion years. In another few million, it would go out entirely. Voss found that oddly comforting. Some things, she thought, took longer than people expected. 72 hours to yield. The delegation quarters were small and smelled faintly of recycled air and metal. There were 3 rooms, a sleeping area, a workspace, and a narrow room with a single viewport that looked out at the docking arm and, beyond it, the slow arc of the station's outer ring. Voss had claimed the workspace within 10 minutes of arriving aboard Axiom Eternal, and had not really left it since. There were papers on every surface. Not digital files, actual printed paper, because Voss had learned long ago that physical documents were harder to intercept, harder to alter, and easier to spread across a table when she needed to see everything at once. She stood at the center of it all with a cold cup of tea in her hand, looking at a map of the outer rim pinned to the wall. Malin sat at the corner desk with 3 data slates open in front of him, running translation cross-checks on old council records. He had been doing this for the better part of 2 hours. His tea was also cold. He had not touched it. "The Farron Compact," he said, without looking up. "Quarantined 412 years ago. Official reason was border instability. Within 60 years of the quarantine, their primary food supply chain had collapsed. They petitioned for trade access 11 times. All 11 were denied on procedural grounds." He scrolled down. "They went silent about 340 years ago. There are no follow-up records in the council archive." "No records?" Voss said. "Or no records they made available?" Malin glanced up. "The archive index lists 6 files under the Farron Compact's final decades. All 6 are flagged as restricted. Council eyes only." Voss nodded slowly. She had expected that. She moved one of the papers on the table and replaced it with a printed transcript, a very old one. edges soft with age, even though it was a reproduction. And the Solon drift? Similar pattern. Quarantine established. Communications monitored. External trade reduced to almost nothing by the third decade. The official record says they relocated voluntarily. He paused. There is no evidence of where they relocated to. Voss set down her cup. Somewhere behind the walls, the station made a long, low hum, some enormous mechanism cycling through its routine. The sound came and went like a slow tide. How many? She asked. Malin removed his glasses and pressed the bridge of his nose. 3 confirmed cases of civilizations quarantined by this council within the last 1,000 years. All 3 are gone. In all 3 cases, the quarantine was framed as a protective or stabilizing measure. In all 3 cases, restricted files exist in the council archive that have never been released. He put his glasses back on. I don't think they consider it a weapon, he said. I think they consider it management. The way you manage a weed, you don't pull it out, you just make sure it can't spread. Eventually, it runs out of what it needs, and it stops. Voss looked at the map on the wall. 12 stars. That was what the resolution offered. 12 stars, a fixed border, and council ships watching every lane in and out. She thought about the colony on Vega Station, where 300,000 people had built a working city on a world that had no right to support human life, and had done it anyway in 11 years. She thought about the mining platforms in the Dorado cluster, run by a crew of 60 with an average age of 28. She thought about her own daughter, who had been born on one of those outer rim colonies and had never once in her life seen Earth with her own eyes, and who had told her mother, the last time they spoke, that she did not understand why anyone would want to go back. Voss walked to the comm station in the corner and opened a secure channel. It took 4 minutes to connect. The signal had to travel a very long way. Admiral Darren Cross appeared on the small screen. He was a broad-shouldered man with a short gray beard, and the particular kind of tiredness that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy for too long. He was sitting in what looked like a tactical room, and behind him, Voss could see the faint glow of a star map. "Ambassador," he said. "Admiral, tell me where we actually stand." He did not look away from her. "Outgunned 40-1 on a good day. That's before we account for their support fleets and their range advantage." He folded his hands on the table. "If the corrective reduction order comes, we fight. I want you to know that clearly we fight. But I also want you to know what fighting means. We hold maybe 6 weeks before the outer colonies are indefensible. Earth itself is a harder target, but not hard enough." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to make you give them what they want. I'm telling you so you know the truth. How long have you known about the 3 civilizations?" she asked. A brief silence. "Long enough. And you still sent me here." "I sent you here," Cross said carefully, "because you're the only person I know who reads their way through a problem instead of shooting her way through it. And because the shooting option ends one way and only one way." He looked at the map behind him for a moment, then back at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Voss said, "that the Council's greatest power is not their fleet." Cross waited. "It's their legitimacy. Every independent civilization out there defers to them because they believe the Council is the guarantor of galactic order. Remove that, and you remove everything: the authority to quarantine, the authority to send enforcement ships, the authority to demand compliance." She straightened up. "They've been building that legitimacy for 10,000 years. It is the most expensive thing they own." Cross was quiet for a moment. "And you think you can damage it?" "I think," Voss said, "that I already have most of what I need. I just need the next 36 hours to finish." She closed the channel and turned back to the room. Malin was watching her from across the table. "The restricted files," she said. "Can you get into them?" He tilted his head slightly. "The Council's archive runs on a distributed system across 14 relay points. Their encryption is very good." He picked up his tea, looked at it, put it down again. "But their internal sharing protocols between Council members are standardized, which means there are 11 access pathways into the same archive, one for each member civilization. And not all 11 civilizations maintain their systems with equal care." He paused. "The Sarin Assembly, for instance." updated their relay encryption in the year the Council's own records call the Fourth Accord. That was 900 years ago. Voss looked at him. You've already started. I've been working since we landed, he said simply. She almost smiled. How long? 6 hours. Maybe 8. She looked at the papers on the table, at the map on the wall, at the 3 names she had written in large letters across the top of her primary document, the Farron Compact, the Solon Drift, and a third civilization she had not yet mentioned to anyone, but had been carrying in her memory like a stone in a shoe for 3 years. The Aran Collective. Gone 200 years ago. Not a word in any public record about why. Get me the files, she said quietly. All of them. Malin nodded and turned back to his slates. Voss walked to the viewport. Outside, the station's outer ring moved in its slow, eternal rotation, and the dying star below it burned orange and red against the dark. She thought about her daughter's voice on the last comm call, bright and easy, and completely unafraid. We built this place out of nothing, Mum. Doesn't that count for something? It counted for everything. That was the problem. It was too valuable to bargain with, and too important to lose. And the people sitting in that chamber tomorrow did not understand, had never understood, that the species they were trying to quietly box in and bleed out had a very specific, very deep, and very old response to being cornered. They did not surrender. They got to work. What the elder races forgot. The chamber was full again on the 3rd morning. The same half-circle of seats, the same polished floor, the same impossible ceiling swallowed by shadow, the same low hum of the translation matrix running in the background, like a machine breathing. Everything was exactly as it had been 2 days ago, except that the representatives of the elder races were now a little more relaxed. The loose, easy posture of people who believed the difficult part was already over. Omari of the Dusk Collective had arrived early. He was seated in the upper tier with one of his data slates open, reviewing something unrelated to the session. He did not look up when the human delegation entered. As far as he was concerned, today was a formality. The humans would hand over their acknowledgement, the resolution would be ratified, and the matter would be filed under resolved before the midday recess. Several other delegates were speaking quietly among themselves. The Hall Confederacy's representative was sharing a small container of something warm with her aide. The Sarin Assembly's delegate sat in perfect, practiced stillness, as he always did. Sureth, the young aide from Velthari's staff, stood at his post near the main speaker's platform and tried very hard not to look at the human delegation. He had been trying not to look at them for 2 days. He did not entirely succeed. Archon Velthari entered last, as was the custom of the senior speaker, and took his place at the central platform. He looked, as always, like a creature made of patience. He surveyed the chamber once, noted the human delegation in their seat at the far left, and called the session to order. This session has been convened to receive the human delegation's acknowledgement of Resolution 7, Gamma 9, he said. The translation matrix carried his words across the room in 11 languages simultaneously. Ambassador Voss, the Council is ready to receive your response. Ilara Voss stood up. She was holding her data slate in both hands. She had dressed the same as the first day, plain gray coat, no ornamentation, nothing that asked for anyone's attention. She walked to the small secondary speaker's post at the floor level, which was the position allocated to non-council delegates. It was lower than Velthari's platform by about half a meter. Everything about the room was designed to remind visitors of their position. She set her data slate on the speaker's post and looked at the chamber. Before I respond to the resolution, she said, I would like to place several items into the formal record of this session. There was a small pause across the room, brief, barely noticeable. Velthari's secondary limbs shifted slightly. Omari glanced up from his data slate for the first time. That is irregular, Velthari said. I understand, Voss said. I believe the items are relevant to the Council's deliberations. Under Article 14 of the Conclave Charter, a delegate may submit formal record entries prior to the receipt of a response. I am invoking that right. A longer pause. Velthari could not deny it. Article 14 was old, older than most of the current Council civilizations. It had been written into the Charter at the founding, and no one had invoked it in over 200 years, because no one outside the council had ever thought to read that far into the document. "You may proceed," Velthari said. Voss pressed a key on her data slate. Documents appeared on every screen in the chamber simultaneously. "The first item," she said, "concerns a civilization known as the Farron Compact." She did not speak quickly. She did not raise her voice. She spoke clearly and steadily, the way someone speaks when they have rehearsed not for performance, but for precision. She described the Farron Compact in full: their location, their culture, their history of peaceful development across 4 star systems. She described the quarantine resolution that the Council had passed against them 412 years ago. She showed the formal record as it appeared in the Council's public archive, with its language about stability and coordination. Then she showed the restricted files that Malin had pulled from the Sarin Assembly's relay node during the night. The restricted files told a different story. Internal Council communications, clearly dated, showed deliberate decisions to reclassify the Farron Compact's resource access requests as security threats. Trade applications that had been approved at the review stage and then quietly reversed at the senior level. Messages between 2 senior council members, one of whom was still represented in this room, discussing the timeline to resolution of the Farron Compact question, and how it could be managed without direct action. The chamber was quiet. Voss moved on. "The second item concerns the Solon Drift." She went through the same process: the history, the quarantine, the public record, then the restricted files. The Solon Drift's case was cleaner, more deliberate, and more recent, only 250 years ago. The communications were more direct. One memo, written by a member of the Dusk Collective's senior council at the time, used the phrase "managed decline," without any apparent awareness that it was a damning thing to write down. Omari had put his data slate away. He was very still. "The third item," Voss said, "concerns the Orin Collective." This was the one that changed the air in the room. The Orin Collective had been large, not a minor border civilization, but a genuine mid-tier power with 17 settled systems and a trade network that had touched almost every species in known space. Their disappearance 200 years ago had been attributed in the public record to internal systemic collapse. No further explanation. No follow-up inquiry. The restricted files said otherwise. The Orin Collective had not collapsed. They had formally protested a council resource allocation decision and had begun building a coalition of smaller civilizations to challenge the council's authority through the conclave's own legal framework. They had been good at it. They had been, in fact, very close to succeeding. The quarantine had come 8 months after their coalition reached 13 members. Their requests for mediation had been denied 6 times on procedural grounds. Their communications had gone silent 19 months after the quarantine was sealed. The restricted files showed that 2 council members had known the Orin food distribution network was failing as early as the 3rd month. There had been a meeting. There had been a vote. The vote's outcome was listed, but the individual positions of the voters were listed as redacted. 2 civilizations currently seated in this chamber had voted in that meeting. Voss said both of their names aloud. She said them clearly, once, and let the translation matrix carry the words to every earpiece in the room. The first name caused a murmur. The second caused complete silence. Sureth, standing near the platform, looked at the floor. Velthari had not moved. His 7 limbs were perfectly still, which, for a Velthari, was the equivalent of a human going white in the face. Omari opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Voss looked at the chamber. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She looked exactly as she had when she walked in, calm, measured, and completely awake. "These items are now formally entered into the session record," she said. "Under Article 14, session records are public documents, distributed to all registered observers of the conclave within 24 hours of session close." She paused. "There are 947 registered observers currently on file." She picked up her data slate. "I am now prepared to respond to Resolution 7, Gamma 9, she said. No one spoke. The translation matrix hummed. The lights in the ceiling were very far away. Archon Velthari looked at Ambassador Voss for a long time. He had sat in this chamber for over 300 years of active service. He had heard speeches from dying civilizations, from rising ones, from desperate ones and arrogant ones, and broken ones. He had never heard anything quite like this, and she had not even given her answer yet. The words that could not be unsaid. The silence lasted long enough that someone in the upper tier shifted in their seat, and the small sound of it carried through the entire chamber. Voss did not rush. She stood at the secondary speaker's post, her data slate in front of her, and she looked out at the elder races of the galaxy, the same way she had looked at every difficult room in her career, with complete, unhurried attention. Resolution 7, Gamma 9, she said, proposes a permanent territorial boundary confining humanity to 12 star systems under indefinite council monitoring, with no defined process for review or release. She spoke without heat. It uses the language of coordination and stability. Based on the historical record I have just entered into this session, I think it is reasonable for the human delegation to interpret that language accurately. She tapped her data slate. More documents appeared on the chamber's screens. These ones organized differently, presented side by side. The Farron Compact's quarantine resolution on the left. Resolution 7, Gamma 9 on the right. 12 phrases, highlighted in matching colors, appearing in both documents word for word. The drafting is almost identical, she said simply. In several places, it is identical. Omari of the Dusk Collective leaned forward. Ambassador, you are making serious accusations against this body. I have made no accusations, Voss said. I have submitted documents into the formal record. The documents speak for themselves. She looked at him briefly, then looked back at the full chamber. I will now give the human delegation's response to the resolution. She took a breath. Not from nerves, from habit, the same habit that had served her for 26 years, the pause before the sentence that matters, the small half-second of making sure every word is in the right order. The human delegation declines to acknowledge Resolution 7, Gamma 9. A sharp, involuntary sound came from somewhere in the upper tier. Not a word, just a sound, the kind a person makes when something unexpected happens too fast to process. Declines, Velthari repeated. His voice was steady, but the word came out slower than usual, like he was making sure he had heard the translation correctly. Declines, Voss confirmed. Velthari was quiet for a moment. Around him, the chamber had gone very still in the particular way that happens when everyone is waiting for someone else to speak first, and no one is willing to go first. Ambassador Voss, he said carefully, declining acknowledgement does not prevent ratification. The resolution will pass regardless of the human delegation's position. The practical effect of your refusal is nothing, Voss said, within this chamber. She paused. Outside this chamber is a different matter. She pressed another key on her data slate. 41 hours ago, she said, a transmission package was prepared and queued on our ship's broadcast system. The package contains every document I entered into the record today, as well as 57 additional supporting files from the Council's restricted archive, fully cross-referenced and annotated. She looked at the chamber, without any particular expression. 30 minutes ago, when this session began, that package was transmitted. Not to this station. Not to Council relay points. To every independent communication node, Free World Relay, and non-Council colony receiver currently operating in known space. She tilted her head slightly. There are approximately 4,300 of them. The chamber did not erupt. That was the strange thing. The thing Sureth would think about for years afterward. He had expected shouting, or at least the alien equivalent of it. But the room did not get louder. It got quieter. The kind of quiet that is not peace but the absence of all the air. Omari stood up. His forearms were braced against his seat's edges. You had no authority. I had complete authority, Voss said. I represent a sovereign civilization that has not, at any point, agreed to communications restrictions. She looked at him. The resolution requiring such restrictions was not yet ratified. And now it is not going to be ratified in any form that matters. This is an act of aggression against. It is a press release, Voss said. The word translated, retranslated, carried through the matrix to 11 languages, landed in the chamber like something dropped from a great height. Velthari raised one limb, a gesture that meant, "Stop speaking," and Omari went silent, with visible effort. Voss looked at Velthari directly. She had not looked at him this directly before. She spoke more quietly now, not for the chamber but for him, though the matrix carried every word. Archon Velthari. I want to say something clearly, and I want to say it with respect, because I do not believe you are a dishonest being. I believe you are a being who has been in this chamber long enough that the things done inside it have come to seem normal. She paused. 3 civilizations were managed out of existence by this body. The records are now public. The galaxy is reading them right now. There is nothing either of us can do about that. Velthari looked at her. He did not speak. What happens next, Voss said, is a choice this council makes. You can issue the corrective reduction order. Humanity will fight not because we believe we will win, but because we are the kind of species that fights anyway, and because the cost of that fight will not be invisible anymore. Every ship, every action, every communique will be watched by 4,000 receiving stations. We will make very sure of that. She picked up her data slate and held it at her side. Or, you can table the resolution. Nothing formal has to be said. No concession has to be admitted. You can simply move on to the next item of business. She looked out at the chamber one final time. We did not come here to be managed, she said. We came because we believed this council was worth speaking to. That belief has been corrected. We are leaving not our space, not our future this table. Humanity does not negotiate the conditions of its own quiet death. If the corrective reduction comes, the galaxy will know exactly what it is and exactly who ordered it. We will make certain the cost is one your histories will not recover from. She paused. That is not a threat. It is a description of something that is already in motion. The people receiving that transmission right now are asking questions. Those questions will not stop. She picked up the single printed document she had brought to the speaker's post, the one she had never opened, the acknowledgement form, pre-signed by no one. She folded it in half and placed it on the post. The human delegation thanks this council for its time, she said. We will be returning to our ship. She walked back across the polished floor toward the delegation seats, where Malin was already gathering his things with the careful, unhurried movements of a man who had known exactly how this was going to go. Behind her, the chamber remained completely silent. Omari looked at the folded document on the speaker's post, then at the screens, which still showed the 2 quarantine resolutions side by side. Then at the other delegates around him. No one was looking back at him. The hall representative was reading something on her personal screen, the transmission. Omari realized. The Sarin Assembly delegate had both eyes open, which for his species was the equivalent of a human going rigid. Velthari stood at his platform and watched the human ambassador walk to her seat, collect her things, and head toward the chamber exit without looking back. In 30 years, Velthari had never left a session early. He had always been the last to go. It was custom. It was dignity. It was the weight of seniority. But he found that he was not thinking about custom. He was thinking about a number. 4,300 receiving stations. He was thinking about what questions were already being asked in 4,300 places, right now, at this moment, while he stood here. He thought about the 3 names Voss had spoken aloud. He thought about how they sounded in this chamber, solid and real. Not like archive entries, like names of things that had mattered. The doors to the Grand Conclave chamber closed behind the human delegation with a soft, final sound. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Sureth, the young aide who had been standing near the platform for 3 days trying not to look at the humans, made a decision. He stepped away from his post quietly, without announcement, and walked quickly toward the side exit and the corridor beyond, and the private communication console at the end of it. He had a message he needed to send. The silence after. 3 weeks later, it rained in Geneva. It was the ordinary kind of rain-gray sky, steady drops, the smell of wet stone rising from the pavement outside. Elora Voss sat at a plain table in a plain government building near the old Lake District, and watched the water run down the window glass, while someone 3 doors down made coffee that smelled slightly burned. The kind of small, unremarkable details that you notice more than usual after you have spent 4 months on a space station smelling recycled air. Malin sat across the table from her with a ceramic mug in both hands, and the expression of a man who had finally slept for the first time in a while. The room had a single overhead light, a recorder in the center of the table, and 2 ministry officials who were technically there to conduct a formal debrief, but had not yet managed to ask anything because Voss had been answering their questions before they finished asking them, which tended to slow proceedings down. The debrief had taken the better part of a morning. The short version was this. Resolution 7, Gamma, 9, had been tabled. No formal announcement had been made. No press statement had come from Axiom Eternal. The Conclave's administrative office had simply updated its session log 3 days after the meeting with a 1-line entry, noting that the resolution had been moved to extended review pending further deliberation, which was the kind of language that meant, in practical terms, that no one intended to touch it again for a very long time, if ever. It had not gone away quietly. Nothing had gone away quietly. The transmission had reached its 4,300 destinations in stages, the furthest relay points picking it up over the course of 36 hours after the session. By the time Voss and Malin had boarded the Resolute for the return journey, the questions had already started. Independent news networks in the Outer Rim colonies. Free world broadcasts. 17 formal diplomatic inquiries from non-council civilizations requesting comment from the Conclave on the historical records. 2 of the smaller member civilizations on the council had requested emergency consultations with Velthari's office. The requests were listed in the Conclave's public log as pending scheduling. The 2 civilizations Voss had named by name had gone very quiet. Omari of the Dusk Collective had issued a statement calling the transmission an irresponsible act of diplomatic sabotage and demanding a formal censure of the human delegation. The statement had been read, circulated, and discussed by approximately everyone who received it. The censure demand had not been acted on. When a reporter from the Outer Rim Independent Network had asked a Conclave spokesperson whether the council intended to pursue the censure, the spokesperson had used the phrase, "The matter is under review," 4 times in one answer, which was, in diplomatic language, the same thing as saying nothing at all. One of the ministry officials cleared his throat. Ambassador Voss, in your assessment, is the council likely to revisit the quarantine question at a future session? Voss picked up her tea. It was also slightly wrong, too hot, too strong, but it was real tea from real leaves grown in actual soil, and that counted for something. No, she said, not in any useful time frame. And your reasoning? The moment you make something public, you change what it costs. Before the transmission, confining humanity carried almost no political cost. Most of the galaxy didn't know it was happening, and the ones who did had no way to publicly object. After the transmission, confining humanity means doing it in front of an audience that already has questions about what happens to civilizations the council decides to manage. She set the mug down. The risk calculation is different now. It will stay different. The official wrote something down. The other one nodded slowly, with the look of someone who had understood the theory perfectly well, but was still slightly astonished that the practice had worked. Outside, the rain kept falling. Malin waited until the officials left the room on a short break before he leaned forward and asked the question he had been waiting 3 weeks to ask. Were you scared? Voss looked at him. For a moment she did not answer. Then she said, yes, constantly. In the chamber? Before the chamber. During. After. She turned her mug in her hands. When I was walking back across that floor, after I said what I said, there was about 10 seconds where I was completely certain someone was going to call the reduction order right there in the room, and that would have been the end of it. The whole thing would have ended right there, in that chamber, in about 10 seconds. But you kept walking. I kept walking. She agreed. Malin was quiet for a moment. What made you do it? Not the research, not the documents. I mean the actual what made you go through with it? Voss looked at the window. The rain was lighter now, thinning out the way Geneva rain always did eventually. the clouds breaking up somewhere to the west and letting a thin gray light through. She thought about how to answer that and decided on the truth. The Oran Collective, she said. I've been carrying them around for 3 years. Not as a case study. As people. She paused. They had a delegate at that table too. Their last petition for mediation was filed by a woman their records give a name that translates roughly as Sarah of the Second House. She filed it through the proper channels, in the proper format, with all the proper documentation. It was denied on procedural grounds. She set the mug down. Nobody refused in that room. Nobody stood up and said no, not this. They just went home. And then they ran out of everything they needed, and they went quiet. She looked at him. I wasn't going to be Sarah of the Second House. Malin nodded once. He didn't say anything. Sometimes there wasn't anything useful to add. Admiral Darren Cross received the official update on a Tuesday afternoon in the tactical room of Earth's Defense Coordination Center, where he had spent most of the last 4 months with a quiet, specific dread sitting just behind his sternum. The update was 4 lines long. Standard administrative language, dry as dust. Resolution tabled. No enforcement action recommended at this time. Outer Rim transit lanes remain undesignated. Council enforcement presence in sectors 7 through 14 reduced to standard levels. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at the star map on the wall. The big one, the one that showed every human settlement from Earth outward to the farthest Outer Rim colony. All the routes between them. All the distances. All the names. 17 new colony ships had been cleared for departure in the last week. No council objection logged. The lanes were open. He thought about calling Voss, and then decided she probably needed a few days without calls from admirals. He sat with it for a while instead, in the quiet of the tactical room with the map on the wall, and thought about how strange it was that the most important battle humanity had ever been part of had been won by a woman with a printed document and 3 years of reading. Aboard Axiom Eternal, Archon Velthari sat alone in the Grand Conclave chamber long after the session lights had been dimmed for the night. He had come back 4 times in 3 weeks. He was not entirely sure why. The chamber at night, without delegates, without sound, was simply a large, dark room, the same polished floor, the same high ceiling, the same arc of empty seats. But there was something about sitting in it that helped him think, or perhaps helped him accept that some thinking had already been done and could not be undone. He held a single sheet in 2 of his hands. A printed copy of the human ambassador's final statement, translated twice, first into the conclave's standard tongue and then into his own language, because he had wanted to read it in a form that left him no room for the small evasions that translation sometimes permitted. He had read it 4 times. He was reading it a 5th time now. He thought about the 3 names she had spoken aloud. He thought about how long those names had been in the restricted archive, in the dark, in the silence, how long they had been manageable, theoretical, historical, and how in one session, with documents and patience and the specific stubbornness of a species that had been in space for barely 3 generations, she had made them into something real again. He thought about what Sarah of the Second House had probably known in those last months, sitting with her denied petitions and her shrinking options, and the growing understanding that the room was not going to help her. He thought about what it meant that the humans had studied that, remembered it, and chosen to carry it into the chamber with them. He did not have an answer for any of it. He was not sure he was supposed to. He had been in this chamber for 300 years, and had believed, genuinely believed, that he understood how things worked, how the scale of history smoothed individual things into patterns, how the patterns could be managed, how the managing was not cruelty but responsibility. He was no longer certain he had been right. The lights in the ceiling were very far away. The station turned slowly in its orbit. The dying star outside burned the same orange and red it always had, patient and indifferent to every civilization that had ever looked at it and made decisions. Velthari folded the paper carefully and held it. In 10,000 years of deliberation, not one delegate had simply refused to be afraid of them. He found, to his great and growing unease, that he did not know what came next. He was not entirely sure that was a bad thing.